Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amtech Software's latest webinar, Integrating Label Traxx with Other Systems. My name is Kyle, and I'm going to be going over just a few housekeeping items before we get started here. First off, I just want to let everybody know this webinar will be recorded today, and you will be receiving a link later in which you can feel free to share with your colleagues, or if you need to reference it after the event, you can feel free to do so. Also, if you have any questions during the event, if you look at your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a section there that says questions. Feel free to drop a question there, and we'll do our best to answer during the event. But in case that we don't, our team will follow up with you directly after the fact. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our two panelists for today. First, you'll be hearing from Grant Emerson, who is the product manager for Label Traxx, as well as Greg Nettner, who focuses on professional services, things like reporting and integrations with the product. So going over the agenda real quick before we get started. First, we'll discuss integrations as part of the broader product vision, as well as next steps for integration. And then you'll hear from Greg about some specific business cases, including Cloud API and data warehouse. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Grant, and he will get us started.
Yeah, I am sharing my screen. I think I have shared my screen. So thanks, Kyle. So what I wanted to do is talk about our strategy for integration, where it comes from and where it's going, and what foundations we're providing. So the initial Label Traxx promise, which is the promise of ERP products more generally, is to have a single intuitive tool for being able to manage your business, in this case, labels and flexible packaging. And Label Traxx helps you to go from selling, from order to cash, from selling to planning, to manufacturing, to delivering, and then optimizing and visualizing your business. And we have tools inside our application for doing all of that. Of course, even early on in our journey, we found that there were many places where we needed to integrate with other applications and processes to improve that story. And those included pre-press automation, supplier electronic ordering, shipping tools, and shop floor data collection. And in doing that, we often built right into the application purpose-built connections with particular use cases or particular applications to connect a single product or system to Label Traxx. So, and what we found over time is that the requirements for integration between Label Traxx and other systems and processes were much broader than just those four areas. So we have had requests and requirements for integration with BI dashboards, with e-commerce, with transferring products between plants, shipping integration, CRM, you name it. And in addition to that, sometimes we have requirements where the way one customer wants to do it is different than the way a different customer wants to do it, and also where integrations are between customers to different products. So our approach to this has been to build a broader foundation for integration, which is agnostic with respect to both the particular steps in the use case and the application that's being integrated with. So we're moving from a narrow special purpose kind of integration to a general multi-purpose integration, moving from building our integrations into the UI and functionality of label Traxx to working from a platform which is an integration platform that's on top of the application, moving from integrations that require label Traxx developers for building them out to having integrations which are documented, part of a documented API where customers, integrators can do the integrations themselves, moving from a private or custom built integration to a public documented API. And the two foundations for this new approach to integration are our cloud API and our data warehouse. The cloud API is an API that uses JSON over HTTP to do read and write transactions with the system. It's good for real-time integration where you need to update particular objects like tickets or invoices in a transaction context. Each of the objects generally has a call for producing summary results from search terms, has a call to provide detail on the particular object, and has calls for update and create. The API is documented at docs-api.labeltraxx.com. We have Swagger documentation there, and Greg will point that out at a later point. The data warehouse is for SQL access to large sets of data for large-scale integration or reporting. It continuously updates label Traxx data into a SQL accessible Postgres database that's in the cloud, and it provides support for merging data from multiple label Traxx instances into a single database if you are in a situation where you have more than one label Traxx instance or more than one plant. So the cloud API, just to say a little bit about how it works, is that it is a gateway. So there's a single gateway that you connect to. We support different authorization models, including something that's like a basic auth and more sophisticated connections with federated identity systems. It's architected and tested for scale. We have online documentation, which I mentioned before, and it provides a more secure way to connect to your label Traxx instance from the outside, because the connection is through a gateway, so that the requester is never actually inside of your network. And we have built the API out in a generic way with particular use cases in mind. Here's a list of the entities that we support right now. We're adding new entities and we're deepening support as we go. The data warehouse is, the way it works is that there is a database that's in the cloud, which is a separate database for each customer. And that database is loaded by an application that does synchronized private API calls through your firewall to your label Traxx instance to gather continuous updates from your label Traxx instance. It is architected so that it will not produce substantial load on your system, even if you're making a lot of changes. Because the Postgres database is in the cloud, there's no effect on your transactional database when queries are being made to it. And then access to that database is through a secure TLS tunnel, which is protected both by firewall rules and by particular username and password support. You can use this tool for either direct SQL access or for connection from a BI tool like Power BI, and you can use it for data integration, for SQL queries, and for reports. And Greg will talk more about the business applications of it and show you the tool in a bit. So let's talk a little bit about what the future holds, what we're working on next for these two foundational pieces of the product. So first, for the Cloud API, we're continuing to build out the API as our customers are doing integrations. So where those integrations hit barriers, where there are gaps, we are extending the API by adding new entities, by adding new calls, or by extending existing calls to add attributes or capabilities to those calls. We're also working within the next 12 months to add outbound call support for our Cloud API, so that when there are events that happen within your label Traxx instance, those will result in an outbound call to another system. This allows you to integrate with another system where if you're creating a ticket, updating a customer, sending an invoice, that the connecting system, the integrating system, is informed of it and doesn't have to query or poll the label Traxx system to find out about changes. On the data warehouse side, what we're doing is first, we're adding reporting views. So currently, the data warehouse schema looks very much like the schema of the label Traxx system itself. This is beneficial because many of our customers that are using the data warehouse are familiar with that schema. But what we're doing is adding on top of that views which are specific to various parts of the business, for instance, orders or materials or sales, and it pulls together information so that it is denormalized, so that it is flattened and has information from many different tables in a single table, so it's easier to understand and also easier to run queries against. Finally, and this is pretty exciting, we are making it so that Amtech's visual analytics product will support the data warehouse, so that you can use that product to build configurable BI dashboards and standardized reports from within a mature reporting and BI dashboard tool. And we intend to show that in a future webinar. So are there any questions? Oh, yeah, so there's one question about ODBC. So let me just say something about that. So we are not changing your access to the ODBC connection, but there are a number of weaknesses in the use of ODBC to connect directly to the label Traxx database. So the first weakness is that we have found that many of our customers are experiencing problems with performance when they make queries that are expensive against that transactional database. We've also found that the OWC interface can be flaky. That is, it sometimes goes down. And then finally, and importantly, the technology provider that Label Traxx sits on top of, that is the 4D, has deprecated the ODBC interface, so there's no guarantee that it will work in the future. So, and I see there are more questions. Will answer them at the end. We'll get around to them because we should probably hand it off to Greg so he can show the application itself. So let's hand it off to Greg. Go for it.
All right, thank you very much, Grant. All right, let me see if I can show my screen. Oh, I think I was, and then I think I backed out. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Business cases for integration. All right, very good. Yeah, what I would like to do is build on what Grant has provided, but in a very practical sense, take a look at some of the business cases that our customers have come to us for integration, where integration would be the essential element for them to accomplish a project that they want to do. So here are some customer initiatives that are underway already that use the Cloud API. I've broken it into 3 different categories here. There are more categories, of course, but one is order portability, the ability to move tickets from Label Traxx to an external ERP, or vice versa, to take tickets in an external ERP and put them into Label Traxx. The second bullet relates to our clients that have actually multiple Label Traxx instances. They have a need sometimes to be able to allocate or route tickets to different production facilities based on different criteria on the tickets. So that is another reason why orders might be moved around. The next bullet, e-commerce. We've also had customers that want to be able to provide a very bespoke or custom online order interface that talks to Label Traxx. So they would take in orders for products, custom products, or stock products in Label Traxx, and then send them through the Cloud API into Label Traxx for production. And then the e-commerce site would also interact to provide status information about those tickets and information about the shipment when production is complete. And then I've got the third bullet down there, application integration. It's just generally speaking, we have customers that have enterprise level software systems that are really the systems of record for various parts of their business. I'm thinking accounting, CRM, perhaps shipping. And so customers would like to be able to integrate Label Traxx with those systems so they can get the best of all worlds, if you would. They can use their CRM for managing their customer base, but they can also use Label Traxx for managing production, which is one of the things it does best. So I'd like to focus in on one particular integration that's being built right now. It's a CRM integration with HubSpot. HubSpot, you may be familiar with, is a pretty nice, user-friendly mid-market CRM that has a wealth of its own APIs. It does an awful lot of integration. So it would be a very nice partner with Label Traxx. And so there is a client, a Label Traxx client that is working with a HubSpot integrator, consulting firm that specializes in that integration. And they are both working with Label Traxx and Amtech to make that integration come true. We're going to do it in several phases. Phase 1 is concentrating on more header level data, customers and prospects, being able to sync those up between the 2 platforms. within customers and prospects, contacts and addresses. Want to be able to maintain them in both environments, Label Traxx and HubSpot, and have the changes reflected in the other platform. And then also activities. The integration should support prospecting and being able to cultivate leads and opportunities. And a big part of that is recording customer activities through both platforms and syncing them up. Phase 2 would be going deeper and looking at seeing if we can get requests from quote in from HubSpot into Label Traxx as starter estimates. And then further on, tickets from Label Traxx to have those display as deals, deals within HubSpot. Also be able to build out dashboards in HubSpot for tracking sales, volume, revenue, etc., coming from Label Traxx. So let's talk about that phase 1, which is being built now. There are two different sides of it, of course, Label Traxx to HubSpot and then HubSpot to Label Traxx. And I've listed out here some of the different calls that are going to be required for each of those. On the Label Traxx to HubSpot side, you can see get calls because this will be HubSpot and the integration built off of HubSpot, getting information from Label Traxx to then parse and put into HubSpot APIs to write it into HubSpot. And then over here on the right side of the screen, going in the other direction from HubSpot to Label Traxx, the integration will be writing to Label Traxx using post and put calls. Post calls create records and put calls update existing records. You'll see a few of the calls are in italics. Don't know if you can see, I'm pointing to them. The ones in italics are the ones that are currently under development. Don't have them yet, but they are coming. Everything that's not in italics is built, already exists. This might be a good point to talk about the Swagger Online documentation that we have that was referred to by Grant. We actually have two different Cloud API endpoints that you can get to with different Swagger pages. Swagger Production, up here at the top, is where we put all of our fully tested published calls. Those have gone through the gamut of development and testing, and those are mature. And those are the ones that your production integration would use. So the production integration would be going to the docs-api.labeltraxx.com endpoint. We also have a QA Swagger endpoint that we do expose and are happy to provide access to for those of our customers that are developing integrations. It's going to have new calls and enhancements to existing calls that are in development. And so that allows our customers to sample our new hot off the press changes and enhancements to the API, as well as get us feedback, which is very useful. It's a form of crowdsourcing, if you would, our QA, which is helpful. In Swagger, you're able to see table schemas. You're able to review the request and response bodies, the request URLs, curl statements for the requests, and all of these little articles you can then use to basically copy paste into other interfaces that are able to interact with our cloud APIs, such as Postman, which we'll look at in a little bit, or your integrations themselves, copying the curl statements into your code. And best of all, I think, is the ability to perform calls against some test Label Traxx data that we can provide an API key to you to be able to access. And that will go against a test database that we'll actually be looking at in a moment when we do some test calls. Just to have just a very quick look at Swagger, if I click on this link, it should take us into the Swagger page. Here it is. To be able to authorize in, you would need a key that you would put in there, click authorize, and then you'd be able to go into any of these calls, click try it out, put in some different parameters for your get calls. For the post and put calls, we have some sample request bodies that you would submit. So it really gives you a chance to see how it works and to try it out. Okay, let's jump into use case spotlight. And for this, we're actually going to get into Postman, which is a very handy shareware utility that you can download out there that allows you to submit API calls. All right, so the first slide here we're going to talk about and look at in Postman is going from label Traxx to HubSpot. Again, that is going to be get calls that the integration is going to be performing. So use case is a customer prospect is updated or added in label Traxx. You want to get that over to HubSpot. The integration will identify through the API call, so summary get API call, whether it is a changed record or a new record. It can do this by checking the last modified date for changed records or the created since date parameter. Use that to find new records. So it could look, for instance, for records that have been created since yesterday and you know, in the past week, what have you, and compare that against a cache list of customers that it already has and see if it actually represents a new record. If so, parse it, parse the details from the response, transform those details into a HubSpot API call that will update or insert the record in HubSpot. I didn't want to go there yet. I want to go to Postman. All right, so this is Postman. I've built out a collection of calls that would be essential to a CRM integration. And so at the top are the get calls to support going from label Traxx into HubSpot. And let's start with the customer call. So for the get calls, we have a summary call, and then we have a detail call. I have that for customers, addresses, contacts, activities. You can see detail calls for each of those. The idea being that the summary call can check on records that have changed since, or you can see there's a parameter down here, an argument for created since. That's what I was referring to just a moment ago for finding updated or created records. So we're going to look for a change since. I've got this button checked right here, which means it's checking for any customers that have changed since yesterday. I'm going to just click send. It's going off to the customer's endpoint and returning one record. One customer has changed. Very good. So we want to know, all right, what has changed about that customer. At this point, I'll let you know that a change to the modified date, you can see the modified date there, 6/18/24, is going to be made if any part of that customer changes. It could include a change to a contact on that customer, or an address on that customer, or even an activity on that customer. So this is a very generic indication that something on the customer has changed. You might need to dig a little bit deeper to find out what it is. So that's customer 1031. Let's go to the customer details call. And the details call is able to drill down on a specific record, customer number 1031. We'll send that one. We can see that the response for that call has all the details that are possible to update and pull from the customer record in label Traxx. And it's not all of the fields on the customer record. And then you'll find the same thing is probably true on any of the objects that we have in the API. It's not doing all the fields, it's doing all the fields that we think you're going to want to know about. That said, it's possible and actually likely that we don't bring back all that you're going to need in any given use case. And that's why we are constantly refining and enhancing our calls to add more content to the response and the requests. So you would be able to take this response, the integration would take this response, parse it, put it into a HubSpot customer update, send it into HubSpot to sync up HubSpot with the customer record. Then we could also perform the same sort of call against the address table to see if any addresses have changed. We can even specify that particular customer, 1031, changed since yesterday. Send. Nothing, a null response. So it wasn't an address that changed. So we don't need to dive any deeper. We don't need to go in and check any address details. What about contacts? We'll check for that very same customer again, 1031. Send. Aha, we found something that changed. It was a contact record at the least on that customer 1031 that changed, Amy Miller. You can see the modified date. So her customer or her contact ID is 28. So if we come to contact details and submit that for contact 28, we will get all the details about her contact record. It doesn't say specifically what changed. That would have to either, you could do that if you want, but really more important is just taking all of this content here, parsing it, putting it into a contact update call into HubSpot, and just updating the entire record in HubSpot with all of this content, and then it will capture whatever it was that did change. I believe what it was that I changed was her email address. Customer activities. Customer activities are also available on the get call side. We don't yet have the post new activity call. As I told you or showed you before, that was in italics, is in development. Actually, the customer activity details call is actually quote unquote in development, but it's in QA. And so it's actually available. And it is returning, it's mostly past the testing of QA, so I'm not afraid to show it to you right now. So if I click on the summary call for activities, I can see that we have one that has modified since yesterday. It's activity 59. If we take a look for the details for activity 59 with the detail call, here are all the activity details that it returns. And so you can see everything that was involved there. All right, let's go back to the presentation. Going in the other direction, and we're going to do some more fun show and tell here because we're going to involve actually label Traxx, the instance that we're writing to. Remember that in this direction from HubSpot to label Traxx, we're using post and put calls to write information into label Traxx. So the use case is a customer or prospect is updated or added in HubSpot. You want to get that over into label Traxx. HubSpot's a little bit different than label Traxx. As Grant said, we currently only have reactive API. In other words, we receive requests and respond to them. We don't have anything in the software that initiates an API call out, but we're looking at adding those, as Grant noted. But for now, what happens is there needs to be an application sitting in between HubSpot and label Traxx that is kind of like a broker or a traffic cop, sending along the requests into label Traxx. And how it's doing that is it's polling label Traxx on probably a 5-minute or 10-minute basis for changed records using those summary calls we saw. And when it gets content back, then it drills into those to get the actual content it needs to bring across. So that's what the integration app is doing. But HubSpot's a little different in that it does have webhooks built into it that trigger API calls, outgoing API calls, that will interact with an integration layer, this integration layer that sits between, and will provide content in the HubSpot API format, those responses need to get parsed by the integration layer and put into the label Traxx format for put and post calls. So it's going to parse the details, assemble a put or post payload, and then send it into label Traxx via the API. Change records are going to use the put, as we have talked about, and new records are going to use the post to create new content. Let's go across to Postman again. I should have mentioned also that, some of these calls that you're going to be making, like for creating a customer, for instance, when you create a customer, some of the content in here has dependencies on other tables, other content in the label Traxx database. For instance, sales rep number or customer service number. You can see those are indicated by an ID. Well, HubSpot won't inherently know what numbers go with what people, right? So we have other supporting calls. It would need to cache that information with, let's say, the get employees call, which then provides all of the employees that work at your label Traxx facility and their ID numbers. I'm going to close up some of these tabs because they're kind of getting numerous. Okay. All right, let's take a look at creating a customer and what this call looks like. And this is a situation whereas with get calls, we're sending in arguments to pull data from the database that meet those criteria. With a create call or a put call, we're instead sending a body of data, JSON data into label Traxx. And so you can see how it's organized here. We have at the top here header level data about the customer or prospect. You can see an indented section here for an address. Our more complicated customer create call, and we also actually have a simplified one, but our more complicated one allows you to create an address as well as a contact, all in the customer create call, which saves you time. You don't need to do a separate create contact or create address call. Although I'm not showing them here, but we do have those to create a separate address or contact. There's a field here, is customer false? What that indicates is whether we're creating a customer record or whether we're creating a prospect record in label Traxx. I'm going to leave it at false. You can specify a customer number if you have an application that's smart enough to know what the customer numbers are, the existing customers are, and not try to create a new customer with the same number. If you try to do that, it will fail. The call will fail. But if you don't want to have that level of complexity, you could just blank this out, the 1370, not send a number, and it will get the next customer number in line. We're going to leave it at 1370, and the company name is Greg's Company. Let's go ahead and send it. Let's bring up the response. Okay, the response is just the customer number, 1370. Let's go over to label Traxx. This is the label Traxx instance that we're actually talking to through the Cloud API. If I click on all records, and then I sort by the customer number, there it is, 1370. That's the customer I just created, actually a prospect, right? And if we go into it, we can see that here is the address that was created. Here is the contact that was created and all the contact detail that came with it. We are enhancing the call to post and create customers to add marketing categories and marketing information. which will be very useful for lead following. And in HubSpot, that's the sort of information that you would want to have. We are also enhancing it currently to, again, be able to send activities in. And we already have the ability to get activity information out. All right, so I'm going to come back here. Now, okay, we've created our customer. Things happen, things are going well. Let's say we want to take our customer, our prospect, and turn it into an actual customer because we've won some work with them or something like that. The customer update call, we actually have two different versions of it, if you would. One is the complete version where you send into that customer update call all of the content that we just saw in the customer create. So the body of the request would look very much like what we see here in the create call. But we also support one that is just a very abbreviated call if we want to surgically update just some of the fields on that customer. And we'd control that with this update all right here. If it's true, that means that the API is expecting that we're sending all of the body, everything that was in the create call. But if we set it to false, it allows us to just pick and choose those fields that we want to update. And in this case, we're just going to update the is customer equals true. Remember, it was false when we created the customer to create it as a prospect. Now we're going to set it to true to switch it over to a customer. So I hit send. And we get back in the response all of the information. We can come down to customer true. And if we go back over to label Traxx and I refresh my prospects, we should see, yes, Greg's company has gone away. But if we come to customers and sort on that, all records, where is it? There it is, 1370, Greg's company. So we have now changed it to a customer. It's also possible to create new contacts, as I said, so let's go ahead and just create a new contact on that customer record. Oops, sorry about that. Go back over here, send. It sends back the contact ID, which would be something that we would want to record because we could use that again for, again, getting more detailed information about that contact out of label Traxx. If we come back over to here, drill back into our customer, we can now see we have two contacts, Larry Bird and Tom Brady. Hope you're not Patriots fans. Okay. That is that. Let's go back over to the presentation. All right, let's move over to data warehouse. So as Grant said, data warehouse is a different means of interacting with your logic or your label Traxx data. You can connect it to business intelligence dashboards like Power BI by Microsoft, Tableau. You can connect to more sophisticated reporting applications like SAP Crystal Reports through JDBC drivers. It would also allow you to set up more complicated automated imports, which is automated exports from label Traxx, not imports, which is something that customers have asked for quite often from label Traxx, but can't be supported with super reports. You'd be able to schedule queries that would put the output into a file format or an XML, send it off to an SFTP location or drop it into a hot folder. And then other kind of applications that only need one directional integration with label Traxx, getting data out. Maybe dashboards for order status reporting or something to send information to a shipping application. If you don't need to put it back into label Traxx, you could probably build something right off the data warehouse. We're going to take a look at a pretty handy shareware utility that's out there called Heidi SQL for interacting with data warehouse. It's just a SQL client. It's free for download from the Heidi SQL website right here. There's Mr. Becker who developed it. We're going to review in the client a little bit about the config for setting up access, label Traxx schema, the query pane, and I have some sample queries that we'll take a look at so you'll get an idea as to the flavor of SQL that is supported by Heidi. So I'm launching Heidi SQL. I've got several different connections. We're going to go into the sales demo connection. When you get data warehouse, we'll provide you with the host name, user, password. It always uses that port for Postgres SQL. Click open. Now it's connected. You can see here, listed under the public node, all of the tables within your label Traxx database. And as Grant mentioned, we will be working on building out some views that combine content from multiple tables that are related to provide the information in a more useful format, more easy, user-friendly format for some of the queries that you'd want to write. You can see here in this pane that we have information about the schema and the number of records in each of the tables, the size of the tables, how much space they're consuming within the database, which is very useful information. If we drill down on any particular table, like the customer table, we can get details about the schema, all the different fields, the data types, whether they allow nulls or not, etc. On the tabs at the top here, that's the schema tab. If I click on the data tab, I can see the raw data within the table, and I can sort it in different ways. And that is really useful from just an overhead view. This is similar to user mode in label Traxx that most customers don't go into. And then we have a query tab, and you can develop very simple queries if you just want to get information. Oops, select asterisk from customer, like that, and then execute. And execute. Now, why doesn't it like that? Oh, relation customer does not exist. Didn't misspell it, did I? Ah, I just learned that it is case sensitive. Okay, so that's a very simple query. What else can you do that's more sophisticated than this? Let me bring up, I've saved a few right over here. Here's one that will, a query that will return the value of purchase orders by supplier. And this could be refined for a date range, etc. But you can see that this query is actually looking at two tables. It's looking at purchase order and supplier. Execute that, and we get a nice little output here. Also useful on the side here, I should point out, are the different SQL functions supported by Postgres SQL. So you can use any of those. Another even more sophisticated one is a packing slip query. And we're happy to provide some of these sample queries to you so you can get familiar with the syntax. It took me about 5 minutes last night to convert this query from 4D syntax that would work through a 4D ODBC driver to the Postgres syntax, basically putting in a lot of double quotation marks. And there's the output of this query. All right. Go back to the presentation. That completes the show and tell portion of the demonstration. I guess we can now do questions and answers.
Sure. So I've been watching them and answering some of them just directly. So we talked about the OWC question already. There's another question, which is, what are the timelines associated with the integrations roadmap, with all the caveats? The general answer is that we expect the webhooks portion of the roadmap to be completed at the end of the first quarter of 2025, and the Amtech visual analysis integration with the data warehouse should be completed during the first half of 2025, near the end of the first half of 2025. Those were the two big pieces on the roadmap. Was there something else on the roadmap that you remember, Greg, that I am forgetting? I mean, there's stuff about how we're
in terms of like enhancements to existing calls as well as adding new calls, I could say a little bit about that. We do operate on a sprint development cycle with 3-week-long sprints where we'll take on a certain amount of work per sprint to build those out, to take on enhancement and new call projects. Obviously, they take different amounts of time depending on the complexity. A general statement is that puts and posts are more complicated than gets, because we have a lot of validations and business logic that we need to observe on that. We try to prioritize these requests from our clients that are building out existing integrations in a way that keeps them all moving forward. It's a bit of a horse trading exercise because we have X amount of development available and Y amount of demand. But so far we're keeping up. The turnaround has generally been about a month, give or take a couple of weeks, for getting these calls into place when a customer needs them. And generally, I guess that's an important distinction, is that we will be working on calls and prioritizing calls for customers that are building integrations that actually are Cloud API customers.
Right. That's a great point, Greg. So the next question is a question that we probably should have answered. I probably should have answered in the presentation. The question is whether the data warehouse is included in the Traxx, the base Traxx license, or if it's an add-on product. And the answer is that it is separately licensed. It's a separately licensed add-on product, and you should look at our website for details about that, or contact Nick on our sales team, or Rob. The next question is also a great question, which is what version of Traxx is needed to utilize the API? And the answer to that is any version after 9, so version 9.x. So any of the version 9 versions or 9.1 versions that are out there. And I think there's another question that I don't really understand. It's if we mentioned if 1-point ERP systems would be the one that could integrate with Traxx. So the point of this whole presentation is that we're providing an API which allows for integration with many different systems. So if 1-point ERP has a mechanism, as I'm sure it does, for integration, then you can build that integration from our cloud API and data warehouse.
That's a good way of putting it, Grant. Yep.
So Grant, I think we're kind of coming up here on time. So any of the additional questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, our team will follow up with you directly. And again, thank you all for showing up today. We really appreciate your time, and that will be the end unless Grant or Greg, if you have anything else.
Nope, it was great to talk to you guys. We'll follow up on the additional questions. I'll do them just after we end the call.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.